when you think of data centers, I think there are 3 or 4 things the data center manufacturers are looking for. The first thing is you got to build it. So there's a build phase, and you got to make sure you actually build it on time, within budget, etc. So that's the first thing. The second most important thing for any data center provider is uptime. The third thing is energy efficiency. It's a big part of the cost structure of running a data center is energy and power, and therefore you got to make sure that you're running it in the most efficient way. Make sure we do that. You have a lot of solutions that make sure that the data centers are running all the time, that it's 100% available all the time. Now, if you have a software layer that can understand the weather outside, that can understand the density of the room, that can understand the relative humidity, the temperature, the pressure, all of that, the heat dissipation, the heat generation, all of that, then it can play a superior role in optimizing the HVAC and control it in a way that it consumes less energy, right? That's what Forge does. In general, for all macros are very, very strong, and data center is just giving the impetus. It's only making it stronger, let's put it that way. So data center is a very important piece in our growth strategy, and if everything gets built out, like I said, the capacity will go from 1 to 8, and we'll ride on that wave, and I think we'll get the growth.
Hello and welcome to TechPulse, and today we are having a very, very important conversation around AI and its infrastructure. We are talking to Mr. Ashish Modi. He is the president for Honeywell, India and APAC. Thank you so much for having us here and having a conversation with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now, we have to firstly understand that you work with data centers, you help in their construction, providing them very valuable resources. And for AI, data centers are their backbone. Can you run us through what support you are exactly providing to the data centers that are building up right now?
Yeah, sure. So when you think of data centers, I think there are 3 or 4 things the data center manufacturers are looking for. The first thing is you got to build it. So there's a build phase, and you got to make sure you actually build it on time, within budget, etc. So that's the first thing. The second most important thing for any data center provider is uptime. It has to be on all the time. It has to be running all the time. It can't go down, essentially, right? So that's the second big important thing. The third thing is energy efficiency. It's a big part of the cost structure of running a data center is energy and power, and therefore you got to make sure that you're running it in the most efficient way. They have a metric called PUE, which is a very important metric they track, which controls their energy efficiency and the power usage. So that's the third thing. And the fourth thing is, when you think about it, the amount of data that's going in a data center, it's somebody else's data. And therefore, cybersecurity is a very important piece in the construct of data center. And finally, a lot of people are now trying to be green and making sure that the data centers are green because it's such a power guzzler. And when we think about what we provide solutions that address all 4 or 5 things, right? So for example, we want to make sure before we talk about solutions, etc., are you able to provide the equipment on time, within budget? Because supply chain is such a big issue. So we want to make sure that the data centers are built on time, right? That's a very important piece. Often people don't talk about it. People talk about all the fancy stuff, but actually you got to do the bread and butter basic stuff. So we make sure we do that. We have a lot of solutions that make sure that the data centers are running all the time, that it's 100% available all the time. There's many disruptions that can happen on fire, security, all of that stuff. So we make sure that we have solutions around that. We have a very strong software layer that ensures that the data center is running with minimum energy consumption, so energy efficiency, and ensuring that they meet their power requirements. And finally, we have a very strong suite of cybersecurity portfolio, OT cybersecurity portfolio that ensure the data is safe and secure. So we have pretty much offerings across the board that ensure the data center infrastructure providers are getting what they need.
What we were able to find out in our research was that as of now, about 5% of the entire pie that Honeywell deals with is of the data center operations that you're providing. If you can give us an insight into that, and of course, the fact that what do you see it as a future, what is the rate of growth that you see in this particular segment for Honeywell?
Yeah, huge growth, right? In terms of, there's 2 parts to it. One is, of course, we see a lot of announcements of data center infrastructure being put both in India and pretty much globally. You take any major region, there is capacity announcements. I think you mentioned in your opening the growth of data centers. Today we had 1 gigawatt. There are different reports, but I think the general consensus is it will be 8 gigawatt just in India. I'm talking maybe 10, depending on what happens when. So, think about 1 going to 8, this 8x growth in the next 5 years, and if you compound it, it's massive growth. Obviously, we play in the ecosystem and we contribute to the stack that I just explained. So just by virtue of that stack getting built out and that capacity coming online, we will have a role to play because we are one of the major players in this segment. We will grow with that. I mean, there's no reason why we wouldn't grow at that rate or more.
So if you can give us through
Yeah.
how exactly what is that USP that is helping Forge platform to grow?
Yeah. So I spoke about the software layer on top that sits on all your hardware essentially. And it essentially what it's doing is not only just orchestrating the different hardware that I explained, but most importantly, solving a real problem for the customer. And the biggest use case for a customer, for a data center customer, is energy efficiency. Meaning that if I'm using 100 units of energy, can it be 90, can it be 80, can it be 75, for example? So the biggest use case for our data center customers through Forge is to solve for energy efficiency. The way it solves today the energy efficiency problem is by solving how you control the HVAC, because in data center that you explained the liquid cooling, I'll come to that in a second. But in the traditional data center, you had HVAC and that was blowing air and it was trying to cool the racks, the server rooms, etc., to reduce the energy, the heating, and therefore. But in the process, it was being very inefficient because it's just blowing air and trying to cool the room. Now, if you have a software layer that can understand the weather outside, that can understand the density of the room, that can understand the relative humidity, the temperature, the pressure, all of that, the heat dissipation, the heat generation, all of that, then it can play a superior role in optimizing the HVAC and control it in a way that it consumes less energy, right? That's what Forge does, just one use case. Of course, you got to balance out the comfort, you got to balance out compliance, this, that, there's a lot of other things that it has to balance out. And then eventually it reduces the energy. So that is the biggest use case and the most effective use case for Forge to sit on.
We see that every day there is a new model, every day there is a huge demand that is waking up. How future-proof is the solutions that you're providing? So, for example, Forge, as of today, it can handle, say, a quantum of problems. But in future, if there is a new model, say OpenAI comes up with a newer model, how quickly can it be modified to adapt to that? If you can run us through that, or these solutions of these natures?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the biggest use case for somebody like Forge is to solve the energy problem. To answer your question, if let's say an OpenAI or whoever comes in with a certain model that consumes less compute power or compute capacity, and therefore consumes or produces less heat, consumes less power, and therefore, how would you modulate? Forge would be able to manage that, because depending on the amount of heat that is being generated, it can modulate itself to optimize, because it's optimizing the heat equation. It doesn't care which model is running. So I think I think Forge can take. I mean, it's very modular. It will learn and it will modulate itself to address that question. I think a bigger question is the amount of capacity. To our earlier conversation, a little bit. What capacity to build is a more important question, because if you let's say over design and overbuild, then that's a bigger problem to solve, because the compute power that might be required might be less than what we think it is today. So I think that is a bigger decision point. But once that decision point is made, I think the equipment and the stack that I explained to you still applies.
Fair.
So that doesn't really change.
So of course, planning stage is what eventually will make sure that the future proofing is happening.
The one thing that most of our customers, as we talk to them, talk about is being modular.
Okay.
Modularity is a very important consideration in the design stage, which is that you should have the ability to scale up and scale down depending on the demand.
Okay.
So to that extent, people are mindful around how they will design it. But that's a call you make depending on. It's for any industry, any capex that you're putting in. You got to make a call on what's the size, and that's a supply-demand question.
Day by day, we know the kind of bidding that is happening these days. If you can tell us exactly which region for your business specifically, or perhaps in general where the market is moving, is the most in demand that you see, or perhaps surprised you that you were surprised to see the kind of growth that is happening there?
No, I mean, I can't think of any region that is not on this bandwagon.
Okay.
Which is very interesting. And for a long time, I thought maybe parts of Asia Pac weren't, building out as much, but I was wrong. I mean, there's enough capacity that is also being built in Asia Pac part of the market. I think it's public knowledge. US has built a lot of it. A lot of the developed markets have also put in a lot of capex, which is interesting. it is expected that developing markets like ours would, would do, would put in the money in something like this. So I can't pick one market that's not doing it almost. It's like every market is very bullish on it. I think the rate of how or when it will get built will vary depending on availability of resources, capability, capex flow, land, and all of that. But there's not a market that has not announced big capacity adds.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But if we have to get an insight, say for example, if I twist it a bit, I can ask you which market, according to you, have seen is the fastest in execution.
I mean, even before we started talking about AI, US had built a lot of capacity already in the AI data center space, right?
Okay.
And they are now coming over here because that's saturated. The backlog is so big that you can't build more, pretty much.
Any competition in this side of the world when it comes to APAC? Do you see particular market that is reaching there?
No, a lot of the capacity that is, I mean, if you think about it, is not only just to serve the local markets. A lot of the data sovereignty requirement is also driving a lot of data center build out. So to that extent, a lot of people are building. So it's not really a competition so much, but yeah, we are building out for a lot of the players from outside. So I don't see this as a competition so much as even if you just fulfill your own domestics, data demands, there's maximum capacity that will be needed and will be built out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, India is of course very active in this race as well, and we have shown the world our might. We had one of the biggest conferences, actually the largest conference for AI as well this year itself.
Yeah.
Where do you see India in your growth plan?
Big time. India in general, let me start by saying that India in general for all macros are very, very strong. And data center is just giving the impetus, it's only making it stronger, let's put it that way. So data center is a very important piece in our growth strategy. And, if everything gets built out, like I said, the capacity will go from 1 to 8 and we'll ride on that wave, and, I think we'll get the growth as well. So, I mean, short answer is, we are very bullish on the India data center story, and it's part of our growth strategy.
Well, we are very happy to hear that. We also wanted to understand, naturally, as you mentioned, that this entire space is growing so aggressively right now that naturally the market is also seeing competition.
Sure.
You of course have a very big advantage as well, but at the same time, Johnson Controls and Siemens also is there in the market.
Yep.
What is the exact USP that you are offering? Is it the product? Is it the build quality? Or is it the integrated solution? If you can give us an insight.
All of the above.
Okay.
So, we don't think of, a lot of the players think of point solutions. And traditionally, the way we have played in the market and the way we have thought of any market is through an integrated, in an integrated way, in a solution way. So we are trying to solve a customer problem, not just trying to sell an equipment or a product. That's fundamental to who we are and how we have grown as a company. I spoke about the 4 things up front. You got to build on time, so your supply chains have to work. You have to be on all the time. So uptime is very important. Resiliency is very important. Energy efficiency, cybersecurity, being green. So when we think about our solutions, we are thinking about, are we really solving these 5 problems? So that is our guiding principle for the customer, because we know they really care for that and they pay for that. Equipment is just a means to the end, but the end is important. So when we work with customers, we think about it very holistically to solve that problem rather than think about point solutions. Of course, we have point solutions. 1-to-1 will be better than most of our peers. We take great pride in that. But I think at the end of the day, you got to solve a problem. That's our differentiation, right? Okay. The other one that I'll call out is we are very proud and very strong in our cybersecurity portfolio capability, and we acquired that capability through acquisitions. And that's a very strong differentiator for us that we believe others don't have. And then finally, we announced a partnership with LS Electric. It's a Korean company. So while we played a lot in the stack that I explained to you, the fire, security, building management control, the software layer, all of that, but we now have also brought in a lot of capability in power equipment.
We know the kind of news that we hear all across the globe when it comes to data centers. And sometimes sustainability can be a biggest bane for data center operators as well, but it is a very crucial segment. If you can run us how Honeywell Equipment and the team in general helps out these data centers to match their sustainability goals.
Yeah. So the way we think about sustainability, let me break down the word sustainability first of all. Sustainability means you want to be more green, you want to have lower carbon footprint.
Yes.
Lower carbon footprint can come in two ways, meaning that you actually consume less energy. By virtue of that, you will be green because you're consuming less energy. Or you have a supply, meaning that what you're feeding into the data center is green. So we think of this in supply side of the equation and demand side of the equation. Demand is where you consume and supply is what you supply. So one of the things that the data centers, the people who want to be green and who are trying to be green are doing, because power is such a big part of the equation and the cost equation and the OPEX equation, is that they are sourcing green energy. Now, the green energy can be sourced by either, building a renewable plant along with a data center, and that's possible now because there's such massive data centers that are being built that you can actually build a power plant to feed just the data center. But if you're able to source green energy to feed you have addressed a large part of the supply question because now you're feeding green energy. Now, it's easier said than done because when you are sourcing green energy is not available all the time. So you've got to have grid that you're sourcing from. You have battery systems to even out the supply, and you have solar or wind, etc. Right? So once you start doing all of that on the supply side, you need a lot of capability around energy management systems to ensure that the energy supply is undisrupted. It is orchestrated between the 3 or 4 power supply sources, etc. So we have a lot of solutions on the front end, which is on the supply side, that help you push in green energy into your data center. So that's sort of one of the pieces. And on the demand side, of course, we have Forge that helps you reduce your total energy consumptions. If you do that, then you actually are consuming less energy. And erstwhile when Honeywell was, we had this company called Advanced Materials, which is now Honeywell Solstice Advanced Materials. They have green refrigerants, which is, you spoke about the liquid cooling and the refrigerants that go in there. Those are green. They have HFCs, or HFOs that are green refrigerants. So that, there are many ways to then start ingesting green equipment that can help you be more green. So, but at least in our current portfolio, we help on the supply side of the equation, and we also help with demand efficiency, energy efficiency that addresses the demand side of the equation. So those are the two parts where we play a role, and then everybody else has to chip in and play their part of the role to be more green, I guess. That's the way we think about it.
Thank you so much. This has been very, very insightful to
Thank you.
us and our viewers as well. And now today you have learned, to all our viewers, what happens when you look up something on your AI platform and how hardware is working behind that one query. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.